Hello everybody and welcome for the first time this year back into my Honda S2000. I know that many of you have been waiting for quite some time for an update on this project, and I'm delighted to be able to say that although it's taken a little longer than I'd hoped to make this video, I am also going to make this one a much bigger update than originally planned. The idea for part 2 was to simply give you the baseline numbers, the references. If you don't know, I'm going to be doing a lot of work to this car. If you're joining me for some reason in part 2 first, go and check out part 1 and then come back. For me, one of the big things about doing the modifications to this car, with the amount of money and time and effort that I was spending on it, I wanted to make sure that I was actually making real tangible improvements. In actual numbers terms, I'm not really going to be doing that much to the car. By the end of it, I'd be surprised if it made about 20 horsepower over standard, and in terms of weight, I don't really expect it to lose that much at all. However, that being said, I think it's a very good idea to get an independently verified baseline of your car before you start mucking around with it. So I booked appointments to go to Thorney Motorsport to have this car dynoed and weighed, and then to Centre Gravity to give this car a full inspection report and check over. I popped up to Thorney just before Christmas, we stuck the car on the dyno, and we encountered our first problem. Honda quotes something like 240 horsepower for these, but I believe that's a slightly optimistic figure. In reality, I was expecting this car to make maybe about 220 horsepower. It actually made only just over 200. In reality, I probably hadn't even noticed the power slipping away because, with conditions being so bad, I hadn't really driven the car in anger for months up to that point. But now, having taken it out, I can say that she just doesn't pull as strong as she used to. When you did get the car into the VTEC zone before, it really would go for the red line. It actually felt quite urgent, quite savage in some ways, but this no longer does. There's a very good chance that that is because of the valves. In the S2000, they are still manually adjusted valves. That's one of the reasons it can reach 9,000 RPM, and I've no evidence of that actually ever having been checked. This car with 81,000 miles on the clock probably needs some adjustment, and that, I think, is definitely a possibility for why we're down on power. However, with all the work that we're going to be doing to the car, the whole head is going to be replaced anyway. So if I did the valve adjustment, it would potentially be just wasted money. But part of me, though, is really keen to get it done just to see if that was the problem. Because I also think that comparing a heavily modified car versus one that wasn't even running right, it's a little bit unfair. As you can see, conditions out are not brilliant today, but it is nice and sunny. Cold, damp, wet, lots of floodwater still about, but at least it's slightly warmer than it has been for the rest of the week. The car, as you might also be able to tell, has been cleaned, thanks to Jordan, the detailing doctor, for doing that, and we have some new OZ wheels on it. They're Alleggerita HLTs in 17-inch, and they're wearing Yokohama V105S tyres. I really like the Yokohama V105S. It's a little bit cheaper than some of their rivals, but I don't think suffers. It's still a known brand, and for me, because I want to try and keep this build as authentically Japanese as I can, having a Japanese brand tyre on there, for me, just kind of works. We weighed the car at Thorney, and happily it came in actually just under what the factory claimed by about 10-15 kilos. So that is a good start, and there's nothing really been done to it up until that point that should have altered the weight at all. So we're starting from a good place. That was, by the way, with a full tank of fuel as well. The next bit was to go over to Centre Gravity. I'd never been there before. I'd heard a lot of stories about the place from people in the TVR and Porsche communities in particular. I know, having had a Lotus for many years, the importance of getting your geometry on a car absolutely bang on, especially when it comes to something like this with double wishbone setup. They really seem to be quite sensitive to getting your geometry absolutely spot on. I was expecting them to tell me that my car was essentially falling apart, that the suspension was knackered, the bushes were gone, and everything else, because I'd already bought all those parts in. I was quite surprised when Chris, their guy there, told me that actually he couldn't find an awful lot too wrong with the car. Nearly all of the bushes were in still what you'd term serviceable condition. The shocks were actually pretty good too, and these stock items on the S2000 are pretty impressive. They're actually remote reservoir items made by Showa, who I think are owned by Honda. This is where I have a bit of a dilemma, because I had already bought in all of the PowerFlex bushes available for this car because I wanted to put them on. Now, there's a few reasons that I wanted to do that. The main one being that I thought that all the bushes on this car would be shot to pieces. Additionally, many cars that I'd driven on this channel that I thought were just the best handling things ever were all polybushed. So I thought, you know what? That really should be something that I do with this car. There's no point whatsoever in spending loads and loads of money on fancy suspension if all the bushes and things are a little bit tired. And there is a possibility that with 81,000 miles on the clock, they're not as good as new, but they weren't certainly failed. A lot of people then told me that I was being an absolute idiot for trying to put Powerflex polybushes on the car because it would just squeak and creak and be really uncomfortable and horrible, and I was genuinely concerned. So much so that I actually went to Powerflex themselves and said, look, am I going to ruin my car? And they assured me that I wouldn't, but still, I was nervous. The car then went up to Aidan Townsend up in Great Yarmouth, who's been working on it for a couple of years now, and he did quite a bit to it. When the car had gone to centre gravity, although the bushes and suspension were still largely good, there were a couple of items they found which weren't. The anti-roll bars in particular. In fact, the front one had sheared a drop link, meaning it was essentially disconnected. So they disconnected the rear one too to balance the car out, because I was only going to be driving it straight to go and get fixed. I had actually already bought a new rear anti-roll bar for the car, along with all the bushes and things needed to fit it. Honda, throughout this car's model run, did change the settings on a lot of the suspension to try and improve it and curb its tail-happy nature. Centre gravity had also given me more good news in the fact that the underside of the car was, in their opinion, in very good condition. It turns out they spent a lot of their early days working on S2000, so they knew the model really well. And the previous owner who sold it to me had really done all the things he said. The underside was in decent condition, it had been rust-proofed, everything was all good and dandy. However, some of the wishbones were looking a little bit tired, so he recommended that we refresh those, as we were going to be taking them off to put new bushes in anyway. So when it went off to Aidan, we took all the wishbones off the car, had them stripped, had them coated, all new bushes put in. We also got a few bits flown in at the absolute last minute that I hadn't expected I needed to do, like the drop links. I want to say a big thank you to Adam Ivel at 621 for being able to get all the bits I needed in at a very good price and in pretty quick time too. Because I'd bought so many parts for this car pretty much the month that I got it, I had made one mistake. What I thought I'd supplied was an anti-roll bar for the rear. However, it turns out that what I'd sent was in fact an anti-roll bar for the front from a later model. So we decided to then buy a stock OEM Honda rear anti-roll bar from a later model to go on the car, because that would then fit the bushes that I'd already bought. Originally I had planned to leave everything cosmetic right to the end with this build. But the wheels had to go on for a couple of good reasons. First off, I knew that my rear tyres were absolutely shot anyway. And if centre gravity were going to be doing loads of work with setting up the suspension and all that jazz, I thought really they should be doing that with the correct wheels and tyres that I would want on the car. Trying to find wheels for this car wasn't easy at all. If you know S2000s, you'll know that they run some really quite extreme offsets, meaning that very few wheels will actually fit this car easily. I spent a long time looking through all the different catalogues trying to find something that was just right. I wanted 17-inch wheels because that's what Honda did for the facelift of this car, and you've got a bit better tyre choice. Apparently the handling's then that little bit more predictable, and everything's just a bit better all round. I got in touch with OZ in the end because I found some wheels that they make which I really like, and that's what they've supplied here. I have paid for them, by the way. They gave me a good deal. The tyres on here are the exact same size you would wear on a stock AP1 facelift or AP2 car. So they've gone up at the front to 215 and at the rear to 245, and I think they were 205 and 225, something like that. So there's a little bit of extra meat on each end of the car. That wasn't the only change that I'd made though, because if you watch part 1, you'll know that I had a whole heap of other bracing and all sorts of stuff to go on the car. So at the front we've now got a spoon cross brace, at the rear a Cusco brace, and in the middle a little piece of aluminium that goes where essentially a sort of weird, very sort of limp looking strap used to go. And that, I'm told by a few people, actually does make a big difference. And I've got to say, maybe it's a placebo, I don't know, but the gear change in this car I think is now even better than it was before. It really goes in. It's just that little bit less notchy. We haven't changed anything with the gearbox itself. We probably should service that at some point soon, but it feels absolutely sublime. This really does deserve its reputation as one of the best gearboxes of all time. It's a fabulous thing, and now even better. For the 50 quid that it costs to get that part in, well worth it. At the same time, we also replaced the brake lines in the car, and a big thank you to Hell for sending me some of those. We have them colour-coded because,
why not? We also fitted a brake stopper kit, which is something that Aidan highly suggested. That apparently improves pedal feel by preventing the brake cylinder from flexing too much under hard braking. It really does seem to work, because with just these two modifications, braking feel is noticeably improved in the car, and both are cheap enough to do. The lines are about £90 and the stopper only £40. We also put some high performance brake fluid in at the same time and flushed the system, meaning the only braking modifications I'm likely to perform in the near future are going to be a simple upgrade to better discs and pads.
The big problem the car had though was its rear end, and it's still a touch twitchy. Not as bad as it was before. That's going to be partly due to the fact that these tyres are literally, they've got like 5 miles on them, and it's very cold out there, and this is still a car with a fairly short wheelbase and everything else. But it now feels a touch more predictable. You feel a little bit more connected with the road too. You can lean on it just a little bit more than you could before. I'm looking forward to experimenting with this car, getting to know it that much better. The car spent about 2 weeks in total at Aidan's because it took just a little bit longer to do everything. When I got it back, I was so nervous that we completely ruined it with the bushings and everything else. And I didn't want a car that was really hard and stiff and everything else. That's not the build I'm going for. I'm going for a road-focused build. That's why I've chosen Powerflex's purple Polybushes. And one of the things they told me that people don't realise is that although they may all technically look the same, they're all the purple sort of polyurethane material, they aren't actually the same hardness. And each single part that they make will be made to a hardness which suits its application. And I have to say, if I didn't know, I wouldn't realise anything that significant had happened with this car. It just feels fresh. It doesn't feel any lumpier or bumpier or sort of crashier than it did. It just feels really tight. Tight like a tiger. So it turns out that I really needn't have worried. I'm sure had I gone for Powerflex's black bushings, which are deliberately a lot firmer, maybe I'd have noticed a big difference. As it is, very happy to report that nothing's gone particularly wrong on that front. The cost of polybushing the whole car was something like about £1,000 for all the bushes, plus the time to fit, then add a bit on for the drop links. In all, I think my bill from recent times has been about probably £2,000 on the car. But it's now at a stage where I'm very happy with the base that we have, so we can carry on with the bigger items that should make a much more of a difference. So the next thing that's going to happen is this car's booked in to go back to Centre Gravity, who are going to fit the Öhlins suspension. That one we're also a little concerned with. They said that the Öhlins dampers are absolutely excellent, but the springs they supply are on the harsh side. Now I think this car actually can afford to become a little bit harder, a little bit stiffer, but not too much. The good news is that the springs that the Öhlins dampers use are nothing particularly special. In fact, I think they're made by IBAC, not Öhlins, so if we do want to change the properties of it a little bit, it's easy to do. It's this corner down here where this car always used to struggle. It's actually a greasier corner than you imagine, but the car would break loose most unpredictably. How is it now? Yeah, it grips a lot better. That rear end I've got more confidence in. Still got to be careful though, because bits of tarmac are still very damp, very loose. But the car does talk to me a little bit more. It's still not the best steering in the world, and I am told by the guys at Centre Gravity they can improve that somewhat. Of course, when it has the suspension put on it, they are going to be setting up the way that I would like it, and they are the experts, so they're going to get it done. If you've never had Geo done on a car and you have anything remotely exciting or special, be it an MX-5 or a 911 Turbo or whatever, go get it done. Seriously, it will absolutely transform your car. The work on the engine on this has been pushed back a little bit because it's taking longer than I'd like to get all the parts together, and I want to be able to do it in one big hit. I also want the time to get everything absolutely right with the suspension, and that is going to be happening fairly soon. I'm recording this at the start of February. You should be watching this video at the end of February, and then by the time I'm in mid-March, the Öhlins will be on. So, there we go. That is a little update on my Honda S2000. We are moving on, things are happening. I'm so glad for the sunshine today, because this is the first time I've actually driven the car with the roof down in about 3 months, and it is absolutely wonderful. Thanks all for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already so you can keep updated on the progress on this car and my many others. See you for the next one. Bye bye.